Hey DCMac, I want to talk a little bit about what inflation does and what it tells us in the economy. So first of all, we have to start about with what is inflation. Inflation is simply a general rise in prices. It's not something that's constant, it's not something that's predictable, but it does change the purchasing power of money. If I told you to go out and buy me a bottle of Coke, it might cost you somewhere between $1 to $2 in 2016. If I sent you out to go do the same thing 100 years ago, it might cost 5 cents. So what we're looking at is, can we purchase the same amount of stuff with the same amount of money, or has that relationship changed? If you look at this picture on the bottom, what you're looking at here is a map that shows inflation in various countries around the world. In some cases, you have countries with very, very small inflation, like the United States, for example. We don't typically have a huge amount of inflation. But as you look around the world in other countries, there are some problem areas where you have those yellow, orange, and red countries that are showing more inflation than probably should be happening. So a great example of this is what happened in Germany in the 1920s. As the Germans were trying to pay off their debts from World War I, they decided that the best way to do that would be to print German marks. And so they printed and printed and printed their version of the dollar. What happens there? Well, every time you print more dollars, more of them are in circulation. With more of them in circulation, the value of each one is decreased. They can pay off their debts more quickly, but people found it very hard to actually use those German marks to buy anything useful. It turned out that in a lot of cases it was better to turn blocks of money into building materials, into toys for kids, rather than to actually use them as intended in the economic exchange of goods and services. How do we calculate inflation? What we do is we look at the Consumer Price Index. The Consumer Price Index is how we get the inflation rate for what goes on in a country or a region. So what we're going to do is we're going to take something called a market basket. In that market basket is a set of goods typically found or used by a household, and that basic value of the basket can be used to calculate inflation. I'm going to take a basket of goods and say it's a gallon of gas for my car, a gallon of milk to drink, the value of a hamburger, the value of bleach, the value of laundry detergent, the value of insurance for my life. And I'm going to go ahead and put all that stuff together and calculate how much that's worth. I can recalculate that on a daily, a weekly, a monthly, or a yearly interval and use that to somehow look at what is changing in my economy. So one of the big things that you have to be careful of when you're looking at a market basket is be careful of what you're actually measuring. If you look at something like Cheerios, Cheerios have been $2 for the last 10 years, and that's really great according to General Mills. But the box of Cheerios has changed in size. And so I have to be very careful that I'm calculating a market basket that's equivalent sizes as well as volume of goods. So FRED is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics group that looks at inflation. If you look at what's happened to the Consumer Price Index, the price of goods goes up at some times, the price of goods goes down at others, and all we're simply looking at is how is it changing for people who are alive. The Consumer Price Index does have different portions to it. So in this graph, this is a really good one to look at. The overall Consumer Price Index may be going up and down, but the question is why? Is the overall price going up because of rising medical costs? As we see, the medical cost line is raising pretty constantly over the course of the years shown here. Is our price of consumer goods going up because of apparel? Well, the apparel line is pretty up and down, but as far as how that's going to affect my overall market basket, not very much. It might actually pull that down. Certain other goods like recreation are pretty horizontal on this graph, showing not a lot of change. But perhaps the biggest one here is the cost of transportation. That cost of transportation is not only the price of a car, it's the price of gas and insurance and fixing your car. So that's probably the most volatile of the goods that are measured in this set of market basket goods. So once we take the transportation element out of it, what we can see is that the biggest change here actually happens in the price of gasoline itself. Gas prices have been up and down and up and down so much that they're truly affecting what consumers are paying for and how you use your money in the market. If you look at average gas prices over the course of time, one of the things that we see is I've got to look at nominal versus real yet again. If I take nominal gas prices, it looks like gas has just gone up and up and up in value, and it's super crazy. But if I take the price of gas, and I adjust it to a real calculation, where I hold the price of gas constant for 2015, what I find is that the price of gas does go up and down based on the different changes that are happening within the economy. Sometimes it's fun to look at other unique market baskets that are out there. One of my personal favorites is from PNC Bank. They put together the Christmas Price Index. What they do is they take the cost of all the items in the Christmas Carol, the 12 Days of Christmas. So what's the price of a partridge in a pear tree? What's the price of 5 golden rings? What's the price of 2 turtle doves? And they take this, and it's a total of 364 items that they look at. And every year they say, okay, what is the inflation happening in my world based off of these goods? Sometimes the goods don't change very much. Sometimes the goods aren't very effective. But the ones in here that are really, really important, they've kind of transferred over from the lyrics of the song to show different changes in the economy. So if you look at what's changing here, you've got a traditional value for all of these goods and services that you're going to be getting here. But you also have an internet value. Sometimes things are more expensive on the internet because you have to factor in shipping. Other times things are cheaper on the internet because I can get a better deal. But when I'm looking at things, I'm going to pull out goods like the 7 swans a swimming, which is apparently a very volatile index because the price changes a lot. But I'm going to look closely at things like their calculation for 5 gold rings. What are they really calculating here? They're calculating the price of gold in the market. And when you look at the price of gold, in some cases it goes up, in some cases it goes down, but the price of those precious metals really matters. In other cases, you look at 8 maids of milking. What they've done here is they've said, what is the price for 8 people to do 1 hour's worth of work measured by the minimum wage? And so when you see the wages for 8 maids of milking go up, those reflect changes in the minimum wage happening in the marketplace in the United States. Overall, the total CPI calculated by the Christmas Price Index matches up fairly closely to the CPI that is calculated from the government from a typical market basket of goods. The one thing that throws off the Christmas Price Index, however, is that price of swans. If you look at these big dips down and these big dips up, they do tend to reflect a change in the price of those pesky swans. But as we look at them together, what we see is we can take the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, we can compare it to something called the PPI, which is the Producer Price Index. What does it cost for businesses to do their business? If I put together raw materials and transportation and the cost of labor, and I compare that year to year, it's going to give me a pretty good snapshot of the economy. If I add to that, you remember our calculations of the GDP deflator, I can really look and see, is the economy doing better? Is the economy doing worse? And which parts of it are problematic? In some cases, the lines match up very, very well. In other cases, you have big changes in the price that producers pay, or the price of consumers, or the volume of our GDP. And so we can use that to identify different issues in the economy. One of the other things that we can do is say, we have $100. What will it buy us? Well, in some states like Idaho, if I have $100, I can actually buy the equivalent of about $106.84 worth of goods. That's a pretty sweet deal. But if I take that same $100 to California, I'm only going to be able to buy $88.57 worth of goods. What we're looking at here is a national average of the price of goods and services. So in some states, it's more expensive to live. And so you see those blue and sort of greenish colors. In some states, the cost of living is much less. That market basket has a lesser value. And so that's where you see the orangey brown colors come in. So we're not only taking a national average, sometimes you take a state average and a local average to try and show what's happening for inflation. Part of this is going to depend on how you measure inflation. Inflation can be measured including or not including various numbers, just like unemployment did a couple of days ago, to try and give you a different number. If I'm using different ways to calculate inflation, those numbers look higher and lower. And so sometimes you want to say, how did you calculate inflation? What method did you use? Where does that number come from? To make sure you're really getting a good quality number for your inflation rates. Next up, we have to talk about real and nominal again, because inflation is going to be the thing that's going to change what I'm doing in the world. For example, let's say I take out a loan and I go to Wells Fargo and I say I need to borrow $1,000. And they say, great, you can borrow your loan. You're going to owe us 5% interest of the loan. Well, at the end of that loan, I would need to pay back the $1,000 plus 5% as interest. What's different is that when you factor in inflation, if I take out that exact same loan at Wells Fargo for $1,000 at 5% interest, and during the course of time that the loan is in my hands, inflation was also 5%. The cost to me ends up being zero. So when banks make loans, one of the things that they try to factor in is, what is the value of those dollars going to be at the end of the loan? And I need to charge enough interest that I'm not going to lose money because of inflation as somebody else holds my money. One of the things that people have problems with in inflation is looking at numbers. Numbers are scary. But if American incomes rise by 5% in 2010, politicians tell us this kind of stuff all the time. The issue here is if income goes up by 5%, congratulations, you're making 5% more. But if prices rose by 7% in the same time period, you're actually 2% worse off in the world. Other times where you see this happen is every time somebody's trying to do PR for a new movie, you see somebody say, this film set a new box office record. Yay! Well, here's the thing. Tickets for Gone with the Wind were 19 cents. Tickets for Dude, Where's My Car? Or some other equally horrible movie were somewhere between $10 and $15. Of course they took in more nominal dollars because inflation has happened. A simple ticket to the movies is worth more dollars. But when you adjust for inflation, you find out that movies like Gone with the Wind are truly classic. Their box office totals were out the roof, and these more modern movies that are not great are making money, but relatively are not as powerful. The other thing that we have to talk about with inflation is the cost of living increase versus getting a raise. If you have a choice, always choose cost of living increase. Why is this true? Well, what cost me $50,000 in the year 2000, let's say I get a job in the year 2000, they offer me $50,000 a year, and they say, we'll give you a $500 increase every year that you're working. That sounds like a pretty good deal. But what you're going to find out is that what cost you $50,000 in 2000 actually would cost $67,859 in 2015. That's a 35% inflation in prices. So you don't necessarily want to raise. What you want to do is tie your salary to inflation and say, if the value of the dollar changes, my salary will adjust to meet those demands of the marketplace. That way, you're not actually losing money by simply earning the same number of dollars as you did last year. So this leaves us with the question, can anybody be hurt or helped by inflation? Absolutely they can. People who like inflation, if you're on a flexible income, you have a Social Security type of income, you have a cost of living allowance, those people get more dollars when inflation happens, so they tend to be happy. People in debt really like inflation. When you pay back your debt with that cheaper money after inflation has happened, it ends up costing you less in the long run. But there are people who are hurt. If you're on a fixed income and you have an annuity that says you will earn $1,000 a month for the rest of your life, that might have been a good deal 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, but today it's not that great. People who save, if you just stick your money in the bank and you're not getting a lot of interest on that, or you haven't made any investments, you're going to be losing